Certainly appreciate the presence of each and every one this morning. It's good to see this number out. And we do have some that are out of town and some that are ill, but we're thankful that you're well and able to be with us. And we're also thankful for those who are watching on the YouTube channel, and we hope that you'll continue to do that. And if we can answer any questions or help in any way in your walk with the Lord, we'd be happy to do so. This morning we want to talk about a lesson that was requested. Jonna asked me if I would do a lesson on modest apparel, and so I told her I'd be happy to do that. And the thing that we need to realize about that is, as we talked in Bible class, God has given us His book, the Bible, to be our guide here on this earth. And every subject that we have need of is revealed there. We studied 2 Timothy there, where it says that we can be perfect or complete and thoroughly furnished unto every good works. And of course, in our modern society, dress has become something of a problem in our society. And Brother Barry there read from his translation, and it said sexual sins there. What I was actually looking for is in the King James and the New King James, it says nakedness. And of course, what's happening in our society? Well, the dress of our modern society is moving more and more towards nakedness and the uncovering of the body, and people have no sense of shame or no ability to make good judgments, seemingly. But what I want to do is to talk with you about what the Bible says about our dress as a Christian. Now let me first of all tell you that God doesn't say how tight or how loose or how long or how short. You know, He wrote this reading for us is more than 2,000 years old, and have times changed. You know, 100 years ago, our grandmothers would not have gone out without a long flowing dress all the way down to their feet. In fact, if you showed your ankles, that was considered immodest. And of course, things have changed. So what does God do? Well, He gives us a description that applies at any time, anyway. Okay? It doesn't matter what century it is, we can apply these principles because it's talking to us as an individual, and we, like in everything else, have to make decisions about how we're going to dress. And of course, many times people think, well, this only applies to the women. Well, it doesn't. Men also have to be concerned about how they dress and what impression is being given by their dress. So the question is, what should I wear? Well, number one, the Bible teaches the necessity of clothing. How do we know that? Well, Adam and Eve, after they partook of the forbidden fruit, what happened? They realized that they were naked. They realized they had no clothing, and so what did they do? They tried to take leaves and make a clothing. And then when God spoke with them and told them they were going to be driven out of the Garden of Eden, then God took some animal skins and made them clothing. And from that time on, men have been encouraged, if you will, to wear clothing. Another example was Noah. We know that Noah was one of the only few righteous people in the world. And after he was spared in the ark, it says that he planted a vineyard and got drunk and was naked and caused his son to commit sin. Two of his sons had to walk in backwards and carry a sheet to cover him up. Now the reason that's important is, as you just heard read by Barry, it talks about you're not to look on the nakedness of your father, your mother, your aunt, your uncle, your sister, on down the line there. This was something that was wrong in the sight of God. And it also carries over to the New Testament. We have the man here who was possessed of demons, and the demons were named Legion, which means there were a lot of them. Okay, but notice the attitude of this man, or what we can learn from that. Luke 8:27. says, when he stepped out on the land, this is Jesus, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. So he's been possessed of these demons for a long time. He wore no clothes, nor did he live in the house, but in the tombs. So what will we say? This man is not in his right mind. He lives in a graveyard and tombs and doesn't wear any clothes. Now notice the difference. Of course, we know what happens. Jesus cast out this legion of demons and sends them into a herd of pigs or swine there. And so after that, we see this man. It says, then they went out to see what had happened and came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. So what does that mean? Well, when he was not in his right mind, then he was going around with no clothes and living in tombs. And it says, and they were afraid. So the implication is that God expects us to wear clothing. Now, there's one passage that deals with all of this, and as we said, it's designed to be timeless. Okay? What does that mean? Well, whether we're living in this century or whether we're living back in the time of Christ, there's a right and a wrong way in how we dress. Okay? Here's what was said by the Apostle Paul. It says, in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but what is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Now, why single out women? Well, because primarily women are what attract the attention of man. You know, men are naturally, by the power of God, attracted to the human form of women. And so that's a major problem for men if they don't control that. But men also have the same responsibility to dress properly as a Christian. But what you see, there's several thoughts here that we want to look at and see if we can figure out what it's talking about. Number one is modest. Okay, what's modest? Well, it means unassuming, restrained, decent, retiring in manner, not excessive. Okay, so there's two ideas here. Number one, you can't overdress. What does that mean? You know, not excessive, retiring in manner, okay? Restrained. Again, it's the idea here that the woman is dressing to draw attention to herself. And if that's undue attention, then she can be wrong in that. It also has to be decent. So again, who has to decide that? Well, the woman and her husband or family have to decide if she's wearing something that's proper for a Christian. And then W.E. Vine, who wrote the Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words, says that it's orderly, well-arranged, decent. Okay, again, well-arranged. You know how you're dressing to be the right kind of person here. So, what do we say? Well, it concerns the inner orderliness and attitude of heart. So this is why it's timeless. Doesn't matter where you live or what time you live, you have to have an attitude of decency, that you want to be above reproach, both from men and God. And so your dress and your outward conduct has to be in harmony with God's will. And so, again, how do I decide that? Well, that's my responsibility. And so a common rule of fashion that a woman would dress in a manner that harmonizes with her personality. Okay, how do we know that? Well, we studied Proverbs not too many months ago. And we looked at some of the pictures there of women who would dress in a manner as a prostitute to attract attention. So what's that saying? Well, it's showing her character, that she was willing to sell her body for money. And so the idea here is that the Christian woman recognizes what? That we've been bought by God, that we've devoted our life to God, and that I need to look like a Christian. Now, does that mean that I wear my tuxedo everywhere I go? No. But the idea is that we dress so as not to bring reproach on ourselves or on the Son of God or God Himself. And then a Christian then should be careful to demonstrate their Christian character and not a worldly view here. And of course, as we've said, what's happening in our society? Well, we're moving closer and closer to total nakedness here, that we don't seem to mind what we look like in public. Okay? Second, here he says, in like manner also the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety. What's propriety? Propriety. So the idea here is what's proper. What's proper? What should a Christian wear? Well, the term refers to a sense of shame and an individual's own self-respect. In other words, what would you not be seen in public in? Do we have that sense of shame? Is there something I say, well, that's shameful for a Christian to wear? And of course, this applies to men as well. So what would you think of me if I came over here to mow the lawn here at the church building and I've got little bitty short shorts on and no shirt and my belly hanging out? You say, well, that's our preacher. You know, is that proper? That's the idea here, propriety, that I know how to dress with a sense of shame, and I'm doing it for, again, self-respect. I wouldn't do something to dishonor myself. And so a Christian, especially a woman, wears her clothing to suggest that doing any dishonest act would be repulsive. Like we said with the prostitute, what's she dressing for? She's dressing to attract the attention of others so that she can have sex with them and get paid for that. So she's doing what? She's trying to draw undue attention to herself. The Christian is the opposite. She wants to dress in such a way that no one's going to think that she would do anything to dishonor herself or her husband. Now, the King James Version uses an interesting word there. Shamefacedness. That's for propriety. Now, we don't use shamefacedness much today, but the idea of the word is just what we've said, that you have that sense of shame. Now, I want to contrast for you the difference. A shame means a sense of guilt following an immoral or sinful act. What's shame? Well, it's a sense of propriety that prevents an immoral act. You wouldn't do something to dishonor yourself, your husband, your family, or anything else. And so you can see here, God has the ability to set a standard that applies at all times. That you're modest, you do what is going to be proper for the occasion. And then you have this propriety. You do what's proper at all times. Now the third one here is moderation. And he says, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. Okay. Does that mean it's wrong to wear jewelry? Pearls or gold? Does it mean it's wrong to curl your hair? Or to style your hair? What's the indication here? That if we're overdressing to try to create envy or jealousy of someone else, is that right in the sight of God? We're not to overdress. It's not wrong to curl your hair. It's not wrong to wear jewelry. And it's certainly not wrong to wear clothing. But even clothing can be worn in such a way to cause people to be envious here. And so the idea is that Vine says that moderation here is soberness, sound judgment, habitual inner self-government with a constant rein on all passions and desires. So soberness and sound judgment are the same here. That you're going to use good judgment in how you dress. Perfect example. Would you wear your best white dress out to pick strawberries? No. But do most people wear their jeans and an old holey shirt to church? You know, we got to use good judgment in what and where we dress. And so it's the important thing is here, habitual inner self-government. So moderation here means self-control. So there's your three words. You've got modest, which means that I'm trying to live as a Christian. Then I have self-respect, shamefacedness there. And this is self-control, that I constantly rein in all of my passions and desires. And so modest apparel then involves what? Self-respect and self-control. They're things that I would not wear in public, and I'm going to learn to control that. So the Christian must use good judgment, what? In every aspect of our life. So there's your major points. It doesn't mean it's wrong to wear gold or clothing or whatever, but it's to be worn in the right way. And so look again at this. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. Okay, so a positive and a negative. I've got to control my desires here, have self-respect and self-control, and then I don't overdress or underdress. You know, I've got to make sure that I'm doing what's proper. And he says, for women professing godliness. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the proper means of interesting the opposite sex is by your good character and not your outward dress. Okay? Again, contrast that with the prostitute or harlot of the Old Testament. What do? They dress lavishly in order to attract the attention of men here. So this is the opposite. We should be attracting the attention of others by our good character and not our outward dress here. So the Christian must dress as a godly person. Okay? And again, with good works. What does that mean? Well, the character is what makes a Christian attractive to others. When you were dating in high school and your friend wanted you to go out on a date with his cousin, and you said, is she pretty? And he said, well, she's got good personality. What was the key word to that? You know, we always want to know what she looked like. But he said, well, she's got a good personality. But the idea here is that what makes us attractive to others, it's not how we dress, but it's our character, the inside person here. And so the Christian's good works make them beautiful both in the sight of God and of man. So we've got modesty, we've got propriety here, moderation, that you're not overly dressing here, and then that you dress as a godly person with good works. People see your life rather than necessarily what you're wearing. Now, here's one of the important points. Can I cause by my dress someone else to sin? Again, this is primarily applied to women, and that's because of the natural makeup of men and women. Men are just naturally attracted to the sight of women. And so they're warned not to cause someone else to sin. You know, modest apparel means that the Christian clothing should not be such as to expose the body in a way to cause others to have evil or lustful thoughts and desires. Notice what it says in Matthew 5. It says, "You have heard that it has been said to those of old, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." What does that say? You can commit spiritual adultery in your heart and never commit the actual act. Now, is that the woman's fault? Or is it just the man? Well, notice what we're told in Luke 17. Jesus said, he said to his disciples, "It is impossible that no offenses should come." What does that mean? Well, can any woman or man control the thoughts and desires of someone else? No. And could a woman be perfectly modestly dressed with propriety and someone still have lustful thoughts or desires for that person? Absolutely. But notice, "But woe to him through whom they do come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he was thrown into the sea than that he should offend one of these little ones." Now that's pretty severe. You know, what was a millstone? Well, that was this huge piece of rock that they used to grind the wheat and the corn and other things. So if you had one of those tied about your neck and you were thrown into the sea, what would that mean? You'd be destroyed. So what's he saying? Well, I think again, man or woman here, he's saying you need to dress so that you're not responsible for someone else having evil thoughts or desires. If you dress properly and they still have evil thoughts or desires, that's on them. But if you contribute to that, he says God's going to hold you responsible for that. So what's modest apparel? Again, there's not a lot said about this, but what do we know? Well, number one, modest means unassuming, that you're trying to appear to be a child of God. Propriety means you know how to dress properly, what's proper and upright for a child of God. And then moderation, you're not overdressing, you're not trying to draw the attention of others by your overdress, but you're also not trying to draw attention by being underdressed. And then godliness means that you're going to be like God. And I misspelled that, I got goodliness there, sorry. But godliness there. And of course, good works. I need to be the kind of person that is recognized for their character and not for their appearance. And of course, none of us want to be responsible for causing someone else to sin. Now, as I said, God doesn't deal with, okay, how short. You know, we've generally said, well, the dress needs to be down to the knee today, or how low cut, or what, all of those things. God doesn't deal with that. He just says you need to respect yourself. You need to have self-control. You need to look like a godly person that has good works, that you want to serve God and do what's right. And it would be horrible for you to do anything that would cause someone else to sin. So I hope you'll accept this lesson in the way that it was said. And again, you know, I can't tell anyone necessarily what to wear and what not to wear, but we need to be careful with what we do. If you're here this morning and you're not a child of God, then we've not talked about the plan of salvation. But what you see here is that the Bible gives us guidelines in every aspect of our life. What does God want? He wants us to be one of His children. And He wants the world to do what? To see us as one of His children. If you're here this morning and we can help you in any way, we encourage you to come while we stand and sing.
There's a fountain